In the aftermath of World War I, the Australian government allocated land to discharged veterans for farming purposes in Western Australia. These veterans, eager to build new lives, embraced the opportunity to become farmers. However, the government's enthusiasm wasn't matched by careful planning. Much of the allocated land turned out to be poorly suited for agriculture. This unforeseen challenge set the stage for future struggles for these ex-soldiers turned hopeful farmers. As the Great Depression took hold in 1929, in a desperate attempt to boost the economy, the government urged farmers to expand their wheat cultivation, to plant more wheat, promising financial aid through subsidies. However, these promises turned out to be empty, leaving the farmers feeling betrayed and unsupported. Consequently, the market became oversaturated with wheat, leading to a downward spiral in prices. By October 1932, the tension reached a boiling point as the harvest season was approaching, and the farmers were faced with the prospect of a massive surplus of wheat they couldn't afford to sell, while simultaneously feeling cheated by the government. This frustration led to threats of refusing to deliver the wheat, a potential act of protest against the government's failed policies. As if things weren't bad enough, the farmers faced a new challenge, a massive invasion of 20,000 emus. These large flightless birds migrate regularly after breeding, typically moving from inland areas towards the coast. However, the cleared lands and additional water resources intended for livestock created an inviting habitat for the emus. With a ready supply of food and water, the emus flocked to the farms in large numbers. This influx caused a multitude of problems. The arrival of these feathered visitors proved disastrous for the farmers' crops as the emus not only devoured the crops themselves, but also caused additional damage by trampling and spoiling them. Furthermore, their presence created gaps in the fences, allowing another menace, rabbits, to enter the fields and wreak further havoc. This further reduced the already dwindling yields, putting a strain on the farmers' income and their ability to survive. Concerned farmers petitioned the government, and a group of former soldiers, understanding the effectiveness of military tactics, requested assistance from the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. Pearce, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to deploy military personnel armed with machine guns, under certain conditions in place. He stipulated that only military personnel would operate the firearms and the operation would be funded by the Western Australian government, with farmers responsible for providing accommodations, food, and covering ammunition costs. Pearce justified the deployment by suggesting that the emus would serve as good target practice or soldiers to hone their marksmanship skills. The Emu War was scheduled to kick off in October 1932. A small troop of soldiers were equipped with Lewis guns, a rapid-fire machine gun commonly used during World War I. They were well stocked with 10,000 rounds of ammunition, enough to deal a serious blow to the emu population. Unfortunately, as the soldiers were gearing up for battle, a period of unexpected rainfall swept across the region, scattering the emus far and wide. This unexpected downpour disrupted the emus' migration patterns, causing them to disperse across a much larger area. Due to the emus' scattered formation, the military was forced to postpone the operation. They needed to wait for the emus to regroup before they could launch their attack. The rain delay proved to be the first of many challenges the military would face in the coming Emu War. By November 2, 1932, the rain had finally stopped, and the Emu War was back on track. Major Meredith and his troops set off for Campion, a town hit hard by the emu invasion. Upon arrival, they spotted a group of around 50 emus. Unfortunately, these birds were just outside the effective range of the Lewis guns. Local farmers, eager to see some payback, attempted to herd the emus into a trap where the soldiers could easily mow them down with machine guns. However, these cunning flightless birds proved to be surprisingly agile. They scattered into smaller groups, making them difficult targets. Despite the challenges posed, a subsequent volley of gunfire managed to take down a notable number of emus. Later that same day, another opportunity arose. The soldiers encountered a smaller flock resulting in the demise of approximately a dozen birds. However, the most significant encounter occurred on November 4, when Major Meredith positioned an ambush near a local dam knowing emus would likely be drawn there. Over 1,000 emus approached their position, giving the soldiers a perfect chance. This time, the soldiers held their fire until the emus were much closer, ensuring maximum impact, and they finally opened fire. The gun jammed after only 12 birds were killed and the remainder scattered before any more could be shot. No more birds were sighted that day. In the days that followed, Meredith decided to change tactics. He shifted his focus to the south, where reports suggested the emus were fairly tame. Unfortunately, this new strategy yielded limited success. The emus were proving to be more adaptable than anticipated. Army observed a fascinating development. By the fourth day, the emus seemed to have adopted a pack structure. Each group apparently had a designated leader, a large, black-plumed bird standing over 6 feet tall. These leaders were believed to keep watch while the other emus feasted on crops and warn when soldiers approach. This newfound vigilance made it even harder to get close enough for a successful attack. In a desperate attempt to gain an advantage, Meredith even resorted to mounting one of the machine guns on a truck. However, this plan backfired as the truck was simply too slow to keep pace with the swift birds. On top of that, the rough terrain made firing from the moving vehicle nearly impossible. The gunner couldn't even get a single shot off before they abandoned this tactic. This marked another setback for the military in their fight against the emus. 6 days after the first engagement, a staggering 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been fired, but the exact number of emu casualties remained a mystery. Estimates ranged from a meager 50 birds to a more optimistic figure of 500. However, the emus had clearly won the battle of strategy as they turned out to be brilliant tacticians. The Emu Command, as some papers jokingly called it, had adopted guerrilla warfare tactics. They scattered into smaller, highly mobile groups, making it nearly impossible for the slow-moving military to effectively target them with the heavy machine guns. This rendered the whole operation a logistical and financial nightmare. Facing public ridicule due to negative media coverage that mocked the war and its paltry results, the government was forced to act. On November 8, Defense Minister Pierce made the difficult decision to withdraw the military personnel and their guns. Following the withdrawal of the military, the emu attacks on crops persisted, and with a scorching drought driving them even closer to farms, the situation became dire, prompting farmers to once again appeal for assistance. Responding to these pleas, the Minister of Defense sanctioned a resumption of military efforts. Defending this decision in the Senate, he articulated the necessity of deploying soldiers to combat the severe agricultural threat posed by the burgeoning emu population. Embarking on their mission on November 13, 1932, the military achieved some degree of success, culminating in the demise of approximately 986 emus with 9,860 rounds fired. Additionally, Meredith claimed that exactly 2,500 emus had succumbed. Despite the challenges encountered during the culling operation, farmers in the region once again sought military assistance in 1934, 1943, and 1948, only to be rebuffed by the government. Instead, they opted for a bounty system, originally introduced in 1923, which proved far more effective. In just a 6-month period of 1934, over 57,000 bounty claims were filed. By December 1932, news of the so-called Emu War had spread as far as the United Kingdom, where some conservationists decried the cull as the extermination of the rare emu. In response to ongoing emu-related challenges, exclusion barrier fencing gained popularity as a means of safeguarding agricultural areas from emu intrusion. Ultimately, despite human efforts, the emus emerged as the perceived victors of the conflict. In the end, Australian wild emus were formally protected by the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act in 1999, signaling a shift towards conservation efforts to preserve this iconic species.